This is Eating Crow with Pete Durand. Hey everyone, we're back for some more Eating Crow. Today we have Wes Claytor. Wes is a good friend and also an inspiration. He has seen some things in his life that most of us will never experience, and he opens up in this episode in a way that none of our guests ever have. It's raw, it's real, and I'd like to give Wes a lot of props for preparing for today. We dove into some issues that any leader, entrepreneur, or human being can resonate with. Loss, challenges, setting a plan to overcome these things, and needing the support of family and friends. Wes is really a passionate guy. He has a brand that he's building on LinkedIn and through his blog that will inspire and touch, I think, a lot of people, even if it's just one person.
Thank you, Pete. Pleasure. Real excited to be here.
You are an endurance athlete. Some people don't even know what that is, but you run a crazy amount of miles. Tell us why you started that and kind of what it's done to impact your life.
Sure. Well, first, I just wanted to touch on something real quick, Pete.
Sure.
The Peter Durand effect, I'll call it. So a little while ago, about a year or so ago, I had published a blog titled "A Year Removed," and we'll touch on some stuff that was encased in that. But
Yep.
You had gone ahead and shared it on LinkedIn, and I noticed a really quick jump in reach and engagement on that post, which was quite interesting to me. And then, some follow-up from that, I started having complete strangers reaching out to me, commenting on it, even shooting me private messages. And it was really cool. But what it also did for me was it helped me to believe in my ability to write, first and foremost. A lot of us, I think, struggle with imposter syndrome. It's
Sure.
all over the place. And when you start putting content out there, there's a lot of fears and insecurities. So it first allowed me to kind of bridge that gap. But what it also did was allowed me to connect with people through my words.
Right.
And it allowed me to gain more confidence in my purpose. So I just wanted to thank you for the Pete Durand effect. And a little side note, it is also still my most popular post to date. So just
that's great to hear. I'm glad to be a part of it, and it resonated with me. To your point, just a little affirmation around you can help people build a little confidence. And your writing is some of the most raw and real writing on LinkedIn. So you got to keep it up. And I think, we'll drill into that post, by the way, right? That's pretty meaty. We're going to get there. But where we'll start is this endurance thing that you're doing and the mental and physical punishment you're putting through your body, but the product, right? The end game and what it produces for you. Tell us again, why did you jump into that, and what have the rewards and challenges been?
Yeah. So, just how I got there. So it was the end of 2017, and I had just made the decision to leave my corporate job. I was working for a rental car agency, and I had put a lot of time and effort into climbing the ladder there, and was doing well, but I was suffering on a personal level.
Mm-hmm.
I it was becoming miserable. I was hard to be around. I was becoming out of shape. And previous to that, I used to be a personal trainer. I went to school for exercise science, and, I prided myself on, being in good physical shape and having a good mental hold of things. And I found myself kind of losing grip there. And not only that, I was also starting to fuel some of my underlying addictions in regards to nicotine and alcohol. So that being said, I left the job, and it was the beginning of 2018. And one of my buddies, Bryce Mahoney, shout out to Bryce, he was promoting Run Ranger Run. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's part of Gallant Few. And what Run Ranger Run is every February, it's a month-long event where the sole purpose is to create teams and to amass as many miles as you can, while building awareness and raising funds for transitioning Army Rangers that are going from, active service back into civilian life. I think there's no secret that that's a struggle for many of our service people, but, Run Ranger Run's sole purpose was to focus on Army Rangers.
Mm-hmm.
So that being said, I thought it was a great purpose. It was a great cause to get behind, and a friend was asking for support. So I said, let me jump into this and just have some fun and try to do my part to support him. after the month ended out, I looked back and I was like, holy shit, I ran over 100 miles this month. And I was maybe running 3 miles a month in, previous months and years.
Sure.
So I was like, all right, let me go ahead and just sign up for a marathon while I'm, building up this volume. It's something I wanted to check off on a list. Never thought I would do it, but let me just give it a shot. So I signed up for a marathon. It was the New River Marathon out in Boone, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in June of 2018. It was miserable. I was underprepared. I suffered greatly out there. But I'm competitive, and I was like, this is interesting because I'm not competing against the front runners. I'm competing against myself,
Mm-hmm.
and that was really enticing for me. It gave me an active target to work towards. There are no barriers. If you're competing against elites or even on a one-to-one sport, I used to be involved in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu very heavily.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I go to compete, I would always hang my losses up and say, oh, I didn't have as much time on the mat as that guy, or I'm busy working, or I've got family obligations. Well, with running, it's always just, how am I progressing? Am I getting better? Am I, valuing this? So the marathon went horribly, but I knew I wanted to stick with it and do better.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also just proving to be a very good therapeutic process for me to kind of go through some other things I was dealing with at the time. Well, then that led into August of 2018. My wife and I were expecting our son, and he was born, and there were many complications during the process there. And I've written about this publicly, and that's kind of the post I was talking about before, about a year removed. That was me processing the loss of our son. And that's what happened. After 4 days of struggling and trying to figure out what we were going to do, we did lose our son in the hospital. So from that point, things were definitely a little bit crazy and chaotic, and difficult to deal with. But I had running, so I more or less doubled down there. I started putting a lot more time on the feet. I was, getting more involved with group runs, just trying to find ways to immerse myself in running. But what also was happening was I was recognizing that I was losing control of my drinking as well.
Mm-hmm.
And not a good look, but hey, it was the coping strategy at the time:
Right.
run, drink, and wake up, rinse, repeat.
Mm-hmm.
So, some things happened between then, leading up to the end of the year. I ran another marathon, City of Oaks in Raleigh here. And that one went exceptionally better than my first one. So I was like, okay, I see the progress. The hours are working. I'm getting value out of this, but the drinking was still a problem. And then that all kind of came to a head right on New Year's Eve of 2018. I had a friend over. I was hanging out with my wife, my friend. Everything was great. And then I think I had one too many. And I woke up the next morning realizing that I think I was both a jerk to my friend and my wife. And it was that morning when I looked at myself in the mirror, and I decided, I'm going to eat my final dish of alcohol related crow. And I made the decision that morning to quit drinking and not smoke cigarettes and just start to get my life back on track. And I actually that week signed up for my first ultra marathon. And if nobody's aware of what an ultra marathon is, what it is just any distance longer than a traditional marathon of 26.2 miles. And they have 50Ks, they have 50 milers and beyond, and it gets pretty crazy from there. But I jumped in. I went for it and started signing up for ultra marathons. And not to bog you down with all the details, but to just fast forward to today. I've now been nicotine and alcohol free for over a year and 10 months, since New Year's Day of 2018 or 2019. And I've ran a handful of ultra marathons, and I'm actually preparing for my first 100-miler in this upcoming June. So that's kind of the how and the why.
There's so much to take in there for our listeners, and our listeners are leaders and entrepreneurs who have had a pivotal moment in their life, right? Eating crow, something has caused them to change their views. And there's nothing more powerful than the story you went through, particularly the loss of a child, which, as you mentioned, is the first post that I saw you write. And to this day, I think is one of the best posts I've ever seen written on LinkedIn. Very few people recognize they have a natural writing style. You do, and you're not trying to do anything in your post. You're just simply putting your feelings on paper and sharing it with everyone. Let's talk about a couple things you mentioned just in that recap. When you first started running for this cause, Run Ranger Run, which is a wonderful cause, it's probably a blessing that you were engaged in that behavior before you went through what you went through in 2018.
Absolutely.
You had a physical outlet, even though you were still dealing with the other addiction demons. When you think about the miles you've put in, and I'm curious about your wife watching you do this and letting you know you need that outlet, still despite the drinking, she's there supporting you. Describe how the two of you worked through that process. And quite frankly, I have not met your wife, but I'm kind of picturing Superwoman and Captain Marvel all rolled into one, right? She's been through it. She lost a
Right.
child as well, and she almost lost her husband. So how did you
Yeah.
guys weather that storm?
Yeah. Teamwork, communication, and just being real with each other.
Good.
When you're going through grief and you're going through the cycle,
Hmm.
not every day is going to be strong. Not every day is going to be clear, and understanding that and just knowing that these things aren't personal. It's part of the process, and you have to go through it. Makes it a little bit easier. I'm no stranger to grief. I lost my brother going on 11 years now to cancer, and that was
Jeez.
my first big trauma and what running was helping me to work through initially. And so I thought that I was a pro with grief, and I recognized a lot of these things, but comparing a loss of a brother to a loss of a son is not apples to apples.
Mm-mm.
The way I was telling myself it was going to be, and just kind of navigating through it while recognizing similarities, but also realizing, I was in over my head, and I needed support. So by sharing that with my wife and kind of, I wouldn't say leading, but giving her that example, and then just letting her know, and seeing, I think I was far more emotional in the first couple of months there, where I think she was still in a stock shape or a shock state. But by being open and vulnerable to her, it allowed her to also open up to me. And then just working through it together, it was just monumental. A lot
Yeah.
of times things like these can break or make a relationship and a marriage, and it very much made ours and brought us together. But I am lucky. I mean, I listen to some of my friends when I sign up for races, and they talk about my wife's giving me shit. Oh, like, I don't know, I'm going to tell her I signed up for this. Meanwhile, my wife's just always trying to find out how she can come to the races just to sit around for hours while, I'm out there in the woods running around for God knows what reason.
Sure.
And she's there to support me. And I recognize that, and I know how lucky I am. So I think both of us realize how lucky and grateful we are for each other.
Well, it's an amazing demonstration of the power of communication.
Absolutely.
And you're right. It's at the heart of any strong marriage or any relationship in general, is being open with each other and being vulnerable and saying, this is what I'm going through. This is how I'm feeling. And then the most important part is for that person to have the empathy and the
Yep.
compassion to understand it and then engage. It's pretty tough to do, particularly as
Yep.
you're both grieving, right? Like you described that. Wes, when I consider the story and I consider the fact that you're now doing all these endurance events, how has that impacted the people who are following your blog and people you work with? What's their response been like?
It's been very positive. It's been surprisingly positive. I mean, I would say that like what ultra running has done for me, and just being open in general has done
Mhm.
for me. It's just it's allowed me to connect with people on a different level, and it's been, I don't know, it's a very weird thing to kind of wrap my head around.
Mhm.
I'm kind of doing something public, but it's something that's very personal, and sometimes I get mixed reviews, but
And for you to put out the level of depth that you're doing, I told you this, you're building a brand, and that brand is not, it's not driven by ego. Your brand is that I'm going to put this out there in the hopes that someone can benefit from it. And it's raw,
yeah,
it's real, it's uncomfortable. You are not a rah-rah guy, right? And I think that's one of the things I respect about you. So for you to write that first post, I thought, holy cow, Wes really put himself out there. So there are people that respond to it, and you're right, the network is building. There are people looking at this going, I can. And again, when people first start posting a blog or a podcast or, getting active on a social media channel, they're wondering, will anybody care?
yeah,
It's pretty remarkable how much people care for the right content.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
just after, shortly after our son passed, I began writing, like we said. And
Mhm.
the reason why I was doing it was to start processing my grief. And for some reason, I made the choice to do it publicly through writing a blog and doing it regularly. And the tone and the purpose and the messaging behind all of my posts are very varied. It's not a consistent message. And I think it's me just trying to be authentic and expose how the brain works, how I digest this stuff, and what I find from it, what I uncover, and what might be helpful to somebody else that's possibly struggling in a similar or dissimilar way, but struggling nonetheless. Again, I don't know why I decided to do that initially, but it just felt like the right move. And much like the post that you'd shared for me, but just some of the other ones that I've put out there, I noticed after time, people would start direct messaging me and sharing stories of their own loss, their own pain, their own suffering. And they were beginning to connect with me on a very personal level. And they were also thanking me for putting my story out there. And that's when I realized, not only did it just have such an impact on me, but it made me realize that maybe I have a greater purpose. Maybe this isn't all, delusion and psychotherapy
Sure.
on a public level. Maybe I have a message to share that could help somebody. That cliche is, if what I do, if doing X, Y, or Z helps or impacts one person in a positive way, then it was worth it. Well, I've seen countless examples where it has helped, a handful of people, many people at this point. For me, that just shows me that everything's going to be okay, and to just keep doing my work. And it also, it more importantly reminded me that I'm not alone in my suffering, and neither are those people that are communicating with me. So again, just a reminder that we're all in this together. Everything's going to be okay, and just keep doing your work.
I've noticed this might not have been an intentional objective of what you're doing, but it's going to help people talk with other people who've gone through this kind of suffering because they don't know how to have this conversation.
Yeah.
And what they don't recognize is people want you just to be openly direct about it.
Yeah.
Let's not avoid the elephant in the room. For me to say, "Hey, Wes, I'm sorry to hear about your son. How are you dealing with this?" allows them to open up. And if you don't
Yeah.
talk about it, then they feel like they can't talk about it. The fact that you're doing this, people can read your posts and go, maybe it's okay for me to talk to Joan about the fact that her mother passed or her sister passed or that Bob just got out of treatment and is really struggling with addiction. Maybe it's okay to talk to him about it and let him know it's not a stigma. You can share it. We're here to support you. That's the thing that I've noticed about your post, that it's opening the dialogue.
I'm glad that you recognize what I'm doing there, because like you said, I'm not pushing a product or a service or anything out there. I'm like I
Yep.
said, I'm just exploring my own inner thinking and what's going on in my head, and sharing it there to hopefully resonate with somebody and help change their life. I'm not a grief counselor. I'm not a mental health professional by any means.
Nope.
But I think I have at least some advice or some suggestions to help somebody feeling stuck or feeling like they're suffering. We talked about it a little bit before, but finding a physical and a creative outlet for your pain are two huge pieces of that foundation to starting to get into a better place personally. Regular exercise and creative exploration are going to be fundamental for feeling good and motivated and energized. It also expose you to people. Also, just considering volunteering or doing charity work. Run Ranger Run, I jumped into it because not only was it supporting a friend, but it was something that was going to make me feel good about what I was doing when I wasn't feeling so good. Being of service to others often leads to greater feelings of self-worth and value, and I can speak of that from experience. And then just removing vices, removing things that aren't serving you, whether through your own determination or through seeking professional help, whatever it takes. But if you recognize that a behavior or an activity that you engage in regularly is detrimental to your life, then you need to figure out a way to get out of your own way. And like I said, either through determination or through help. And just lastly, like we said, just finding someone or some way to talk about whatever's bothering you. It's crucial to not suffer in silence. Talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to a therapist, or publish your blog for the entire world to read if they choose to.
Right.
Whatever it is to get it out there and start working for it. But you have to get it out of your head and into the world so that you can start working on solving the problems with your support network, whatever that looks like.
You kind of took the leap and you did it first, right? You said, I'm going to throw this out there. And the fact that people are reacting to it, it's a lesson for all leaders. It's a lesson for coworkers, family members, et cetera, to engage. When you lost your brother, how old were you and how old was he?
He was 24 and I think I had just turned 20.
Okay.
Yeah.
Older
But
brother, that's tough.
yeah. Yeah, he was cream of the crop, and I definitely derived a lot of my motivations and just what it is to be a good person. He lived it. I think if anyone was to be asked that knew my brother, they would have nothing but positive things to say about him.
Sure.
But the good die young, and unfortunately, he didn't get to live out his potential. So I kind of feel like even though I got misguided dealing with that for a few years, I value potential. I value the purpose of life and trying to get all that I can out of this and to make a positive change. Not only because I think that that's the best avenue to go through life, but also just because I feel like I owe it to him.
Now, let's walk through a couple steps for our listeners that I want to
Yeah.
tap into that you've really applied in your life. So one, the physical aspect, the exercise component. Two, the discipline to curb your addiction
Mhm.
and manage that. So someone listening to this podcast, they woke up this morning, they're struggling with one or both of those issues. What's the first thing you would suggest to that person to say, hey, look, this is how you can get through to the other side tomorrow?
Yeah, well, I'd probably be honest and tell somebody you're not gonna get there tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean you don't start today. You know, I wrote a blog about micro adjustments, and
Mm-hmm.
it's something that I've been kind of putting a lot of stock into lately in my personal life because, you know, there's a lot of things. I mean, we all struggle, and there's things in my life that while I feel like I've got a handle on this, now I struggle here. And that's just the constant, ebb and flow of being a human. Not addressing something isn't going to fix it. It's not going to make things better. So, if it's exercise, what's one thing that if you were to do one small adjustment today, one micro adjustment today, and if you did it consistently, a year from now, do you think you'd be closer to that goal? And if the answer is yes, then I'd say start there.
Mm-hmm.
It could be, walking down to the end of your street or walking, around the block with your family, whatever it is, something small that you can do today. You don't want to jump all in and get discouraged because you failed, but something you can do today that's sustainable and consistent that you can build upon. I would say the same thing with drinking. I didn't go cold turkey just because of one bad, New Year's Eve night. It was a plan. It was a buildup. I was starting to recognize these issues, and I was working on trying to remove as much of it as I could. But that being said, it's a constant balance of finding what's sustainable and what's not. So again, don't expect to get there tomorrow, whatever it is that you're struggling with, but make an adjustment. And no matter how small it is, if it's going to get you there, if you believe you will get closer to what it is you're trying to achieve a year from now by doing that consistently, then do that and build on it.
Yeah, I had ran across an article from a woman who was trying to help her daughter exercise. Her
Mhm.
daughter didn't want to do it, was struggling with her weight, and the name of the article was one light pole at a time. So
Yep.
she went out and walked with her daughter, and then said, "We're just going to get to that light pole." And the next
Yep.
time they walked, they said, "We're going to get to the next light pole." And
Yep.
before you knew it, they were jogging to the first light pole, and then they would walk to the next one. And she built that up over a period of time. So her daughter recognized the dopamine hit by hitting the next light pole,
Yep.
and they would count
You
them.
have to be able to achieve the goals in order to continue to stay motivated and stay on task, right? It's the same thing in business. It's if you fail, that's not going to help you. So don't set the bar too high to begin with. Make it realistic, but make it achievable, but do the work.
Sure. Yeah, the micro adjustments, it's a great analogy for people to think about. I'm going to go walk to the end of my street today.
Yeah,
And, the addiction side can be a little more challenging, right? Especially if there's a chemical thing involved. You got to figure out how to get your body to go through that process. You'd
absolutely.
have to lean in other people or potentially get the professional help you need to deal with it. But
Yeah.
if you start to channel your physical and emotional side of your life, then those chemical things become a little bit easier to manage because you've got your body chemistry in a place where it's getting it when it needs, but through a
Mhm.
different outlet.
Yep. Yeah. I said it in one of my writings. I actually think it was in the end of that one post, a year
Mhm.
removed. But at the end of it, I kind of recapped it by saying, your life is only as good as you choose to make it.
Mhm.
You can make the choice to live a good and happy life, and it sounds easier than done. But just going back to just before, making small, consistent micro adjustments to ultimately get you there can get you there, but you have to do the work. No one else can do it for you. So, whether it's getting your drinking under control, or getting in shape, or building a business, becoming an entrepreneur, getting through, struggle and trauma, all these things, you can ultimately get there through small changes, but you have to make that choice. You have to make the decision, and you have to get behind it, because you can't be motivated by other people to do these things. You have to want these things enough to make the changes and do the work.
You posted an article and a video that captured your first 100-mile week.
Yeah.
And I want to jump into that because it was a great, gritty, long-haired version of West Post. Some of the most eye-opening video shots you'll see of you in the run, during the run, after the run. In particular, as you started to ramp this mileage up, you started to encounter some injuries.
Yeah.
The the video of you working through the injuries, right? The hammer, the rolling, the ART, the stretching. Most people would have stopped right there.
Yeah.
Right. You have to do 20 miles that day. You've done 10 and you're in extreme agony. To do another 10, crazy. You mentioned, how do you build a company? How do you battle addiction? Compare, wow, finishing that 10-mile run and saying, my knee just isn't going to cut it. But going back to your house, rehabbing it, resting, and then getting out and running another 10 in extreme pain. That has to be the same thing if you're having a setback on an addiction, or you lost your biggest investor, et cetera. Describe kind of what that looks like.
So yeah, I mean, if you have a goal in mind, or if there's something that you're trying to work towards, there are going to be setbacks. And that was just going back to what we talked about before about, it's not going to happen tomorrow. What you want is not going to be an overnight success,
Sure.
and it requires consistent work at it. And that's how I set out my 100-mile week. I had a goal in mind, and I knew I needed to reach it, and I knew that there was going to be struggles throughout the week. But when they inevitably came up, as I was expecting them to, because I was being realistic with my physical capacity at the time and where I was in my training, I didn't freak out.
Right.
I didn't abandon ship. I didn't say, I'm not good enough, or, I'm not ready to do this, or, it should just, call it a day. I reassessed. I looked at some things like, okay, what can I do? Like you said, I went back and I stretched, and I used the Theragun, and, I rolled it out and I worked through it. And did it make it better? No, but it made it manageable enough for me to feel like, okay, I can squeeze a little bit more out. And then I went out and I just slowed down, but stuck to the goal and made sure that I was still hitting what I set out to do. And I think and like I said, at the end of the week, I wound up wrapping it up, and wound up making the 100-mile week. And it didn't go according to plan. It didn't go as easy as I wanted it to, that previous Sunday before I set out that Monday morning to start the week. But at the end of the week, I achieved my goal, and I leveled up, at least in my mind. And when you look at business, or if you look at, struggling with addiction, or whatever the case may be, you're going to have those setbacks more often than not. I've seen people do it, and I recognize that it's not an overnight success. You always see those memes. People think success looks like this.
Yeah.
In actuality, it's this. And that's true. But if every time you encountered a setback, or you lose an account, or a customer's unhappy with you, if you just decided to close up shop, then you failed in my mind. You didn't achieve what you set out to do. You got scared away by the struggle. Struggle is needed. It's inevitable. It makes you stronger, and it helps you figure out what doesn't work, so that you can then figure out what does work.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing with addiction. I mean, if every setback, or, as they say, falling off the wagon, say if I woke up tomorrow and I had a drink, and then I just said, oh shit, all my year and 10 months progress is now gone because I had a minor setback. I'm just going to start drinking again. Then I failed, and all that progress for what? So it's really a matter of seeing how far you've come, or seeing, the truth of the grind, and accepting it and pushing through it, because it's going to get hard, and you should expect that, and you should learn from it, and you should ultimately push through.
There's another couple of good lessons there. First of all, you said, I can trust myself to hit this goal, which means I can trust myself not to have that drink. I can trust myself to get out of bed and do my workouts and do my job. That that starts to build a lot of self-value, self-worth. Your wife and your daughter and your friends see you hit that goal. And
Yeah.
now when Wes says, I'm going to be a better husband, I'm going to be a better father, I'm not going to drink, they go, Wes can do that. He can make that happen. So the trust that you're earning and extending to other people is really important. And it applies in other lessons for people who are listening. Let's say you've got a weight problem or a food addiction. Having one bad day doesn't mean all the work you did in the previous 3 months to lose weight goes away. You get up, you dust yourself off and say, I'm going to do better tomorrow. And then you hit it. And then
Yep.
the gap between the next bad day is longer. And then maybe
Yep.
that bad day isn't as bad. If you're going to exercise and you begin and you say, I'm going to do 10 reps with this weight, do 10 reps. If that means you got to do 5 and put it down and pick it up and do another 5, mentally, you've told yourself, I've accomplished that.
Yep.
And that's hard for people. I know you do. I approach every workout with a goal, and I do not stop till I hit the goal. It's not pretty every time. There are runs that are bad, runs that are good, but at least you can tell yourself, I've just accomplished something that makes me more confident I can apply that in other parts of my life.
Yeah, and like you said, it's not pretty all the time, and it
Mhm.
shouldn't be. If you're challenging yourself, if you're truly putting yourself out there, or pushing yourself, or challenging yourself, it shouldn't be pretty all the time. And I think that's kind of, an underlying message that I think I'm maybe subconsciously trying to put out there by being public with everything that I'm doing, is trying to reduce the stigma, like we talked about being vulnerable, or opening up, or talking about things that might be taboo or make people feel uncomfortable. But more importantly, trying to expose that, we get caught up in the social media world and the highlights, and, people talk about it all the time. But yeah, everyone's Instagram representation or Facebook representation is not what life is really like behind closed doors or in between their ears. And I think that we're doing each other a disservice if we constantly are signaling that everything's great and everything's perfect all the time, and look at my highlights. Because when people are struggling, whether it's with weight or with substance or in business, and all they see is these highlights out there, well, then it's so much easier to get discouraged and quit, because it's not going as easy as it went for this person or that person. But you don't understand what the story is for that person, or the struggle, or the day-to-day issues that they're still dealing with, that
Sure.
you think have all gone away. So I think by exposing the fact that it's okay to not be okay sometimes, it's okay to struggle, because there's a greater mission at hand, or there's a greater goal. And while I had this setback, or this issue, that doesn't mean that it's broken. It just means it's part of the process, and we should all be aware of it and stay the course. Things aren't as bad as they seem, and
Right.
we are oftentimes our greatest enemy, or our greatest roadblock. And a lot of times it's a matter of outlook, and the story we're telling ourselves, and the choices we make, more than anything.
Yeah.
So if you can work towards fixing those, or at least addressing them, and like we said before, just putting some goals on paper, or just figuring out a process towards a purpose, I think everybody would be much more positive.
Do you write down your goals for the week?
Uh, I tell myself I'm going to, and sometimes I try to, but then I never refer to it. So,
Sure.
I use Strava for running, that app, and
Okay.
that's been helpful for me, because you can set like a weekly goal in there and an annual goal, so that keeps me accountable there.
Perfect.
And then, I started doing the 5 a.m. wake up. I began that little back in the beginning of 2018, when I started all this.
Hmm.
And every morning, I get up at 5 a.m., without missing it. And either I read, or I write, or I run. It's one of the three.
Hmm.
And I found that when I started trying to write down my weekly goals, it became too much of a job. It wasn't as organic or natural as I wanted it to be. and it felt like I was having to do these things for something other than what I was trying to do.
Great point.
So I came back to what's working for me and why am I doing this to begin with? So if I felt like writing something that day, I'd write. If I knew I had a bigger week in miles to get, I'll go and run. And if neither one was enticing, or if I just felt like I needed a break or just to relax, then I pick up a book. But while I don't write down my goals, I am disciplined in making sure that I am up every day at 5 with a purpose, and I stick to it.
Well, that's great. And you're right. A lot of people's brains work differently. Some people have to write that down to put themselves accountable. I block all my exercise and my workouts in my calendar a week or a month ahead and make sure that I protect that time. But the 5 a.m. thing, I am a huge believer in the early morning riser analogy.
Yep.
A couple reasons. Nobody schedules a meeting at 5 a.m., so that time's pretty safe. My family, especially when I had young kids like you, they're not up at 5 a.m., clear my head for the day, and sometimes get my best work out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
A cup of coffee, boom, I'm off. And whether it's researching something or writing a LinkedIn post or whatever it might be, it's a great time to get that done. So good advice for everybody, and especially people that say, I'm not a morning person. No one's a morning person.
Yeah. Discipline.
It's discipline. And you can't get that time back, and it forces you to go to bed a bit earlier because most people don't recognize, well, it's not productive. They're watching TV. They might say that's when I relax, but you know what? You're losing an opportunity.
Yeah, it's screen time.
It's screen time. You could go to bed, recharge your mind, your body, and your soul, get up and be much more productive. So I always try to pass that advice on to people that rest is so important, and that early morning time is just the most productive time for almost all of us.
People don't want to hear it though. They don't want to hear get up earlier. But like you said, no one's a morning person. I say I am, but there's 3 out of 7 days a week where I just want to hit the snooze or turn it off and go back to sleep, even now after 2 years of doing it. But, more so as a husband and a father, when you're ultra running and you're training and you're doing hours upon hours of training a week, there's only so much time that you can find to be selfish.
Yes.
And so I found that, you got to get it out in the morning. And like you said, it's precious time in the morning to gather your thoughts, explore creativity. If you're an anxious person by nature, I know I am, it allows me to just collect my day and put my agenda out of things that I need to knock out so that when I do hit the day, running, I feel a lot more prepared and well scheduled.
There are very few people who have achieved success without picking up this habit. And most of them, as soon as they put their feet in the ground and get up, they already feel like they've won the day.
Absolutely.
And it's very powerful. Well, Wes, this has been a very, I'll call it deeply powerful and personal episode. And there's a lot here for our listeners. And I really appreciate you taking the time to open up and share your thoughts. And we will continue to follow you on LinkedIn. For those of you who would like to know where to reach Wes, I'm going to put his information in the show notes, his LinkedIn profile and his blog, so you can follow along with Wes and his journey. And hopefully it helps you. Like to your point, Wes, if one person's listening to this and it changes their life, mission accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on, Pete. I love listening to all of your content and reading what you're putting out there. Like I said, I think you're doing great work, and let's continue to strive for better.
We'll get another episode because I want to hear how this 100-mile thing went.
Sounds good, man.
Can't wait for that
Happy
video.
Holidays to you and yours.
You too. Thanks, Wes.
Thanks for checking out Eating Crow. Like and subscribe so you never miss a video.